Marian stirred her tea vigorously with a spoon, though the sugar had long since dissolved. She just needed to do something to keep her hands busy. It always helped when she was nervous. Right now, she was extremely nervous. But how could she be calm? Richard's ex-wife was sitting at the table across from her. Not long ago, she was choosing this table with so much love. She wanted to make the family home cozy. Until now, her husband's return from business trips had always been like a small holiday for Marian. She always put on a beautiful dress, cooked his favorite food, and glowed with excitement because she missed her beloved very much. But this time, he didn't call her in advance like he usually did. No, this time he just rang the doorbell, but when she opened the door, she was completely confused for the first few seconds because there was a woman about her age standing behind Richard, and there was a boy of about 10 years old standing next to her, holding her hand. "I'll explain," Richard said, the most trite, stupid, and inappropriate phrase for such a situation. Marian nodded and stepped back, allowing the strangers and her husband into the apartment. She didn't understand what was going on at the time. She thought maybe they were his relatives. Well, they were, in a certain way. Richard and Marian had been married for 6 years but had met the year before. They met in a bookstore. Everything happened just like in the movies. It was a very romantic encounter, a sign of destiny. Marian was trying to get a love novel by her favorite author and could not reach the top shelf. The sales assistants were busy, and it was pointless to wait for their help. But suddenly, she heard a pleasant male voice. "Miss, let me help you. Otherwise, you'll fall down together with this shelf." Marian turned and saw a man in a funny hat. "Thank you so much," she said and smiled at him. Marian clutched the book. She had been waiting for it for a long time. "Do you really read books like that?" The stranger pointed to the book, apparently understanding everything by the pink hearts on the cover. "Yes." "Why do you ask?" Marian asked in surprise. "Just wondering," he shrugged. "I mean, such books are full of lies. Real life is more interesting. The men from the novels couldn't exist in reality. You know, actually, my book preferences are none of your business," Marian replied without a smile. She couldn't stand strangers prying into her private life. So she headed for the cash register. Why did he even bother her with his inappropriate comments? Actually, she was satisfied with the fact that in her life everything was quiet and not as exciting as on the pages of such novels. That's what books are for, to take a break from reality, in which sometimes everything is so predictable and boring. "Miss, I'm sorry." He approached Marian when the cashier was already handing her a bag with the purchase. "I didn't mean to offend you. I wanted to keep the conversation going somehow. I forgive you," Marian said in a mocking tone, adjusting her scarf. "But you failed." "Failed in what?" "Failed to impress you," Richard said and smiled a silly, apologizing smile. "Oh, no, you impressed me. I would never have let you into the book club." "Are you a member of a book club?" "My friends and I." "Actually, mister, excuse me, but I'm in a hurry. Let me walk you home." She shrugged her shoulders and silently moved toward the exit. He hurriedly opened the door in front of her. She walked out without thanking him and headed towards the bus stop. "Can you give me one more chance?" "Why?" "Because I like you so much." She glanced at him. He's so persistent. What was that supposed to mean? That he's dangerous and she should run to the first bus and get as far away from him as possible? Or, no, that's nonsense. He's just a man who's not very romantic or creative. But that doesn't automatically make him a bad person. She doesn't know him at all. So maybe she should give him a chance. And so she accepted his invitation to have a cup of coffee right now and gave him her phone number. And then, events developed not too quickly, but dynamically. They were learning about each other's lives. He grew up in a single-parent family, but he had always dreamed of a large, friendly family. Richard worked as a manager in the advertising department of a large provider of mobile and internet communications. He had a higher education. Marian liked to listen to his stories more than to talk about herself. But in the case of Richard, everything happened differently. She had to accept the fact that he happened to be an extremely quiet man. He preferred to be silent almost all the time. That day, in the bookstore, he had literally forced himself to talk to the stranger. That's how much he liked her. They didn't talk about books ever again because, as it turned out, he didn't like to read. The only reason he went to the bookstore that day was because his boss had told all the employees to read a book by some sales expert. Meetings with parents on both sides took place one after the other. First, they went to his mom and grandmother, who, unfortunately, was not that old, but wasn't thinking straight and understanding what was going on around her anymore. "You seem very nice to me," Richard's mom said to Marion. "I think you'll understand him, forgive him, and always support him," she added and looked strangely. But Marion ignored it. She decided that Richard's mom was too excited to meet her son's fiancée. As for Marion's parents, they had a very mixed reaction to her choice. "It's impossible to understand if you've met the right person," Mom said. "Years of living together will show everything. But remember that you can always count on our help. I think you should not be in any hurry to get married," her father said. "Take your time. First, try to live together and get to know each other better. Weddings are expensive and stressful. What's the point of it all if you're gonna be divorced in 3 months? Dad, stop it," Marion said indignantly. "What?" He raised his eyebrows. "Your mom was right to say that time will put everything in its place. I remember the story of my great-grandfather's wedding. The wedding was amazing. Great treats, beautiful decorations, and expensive drinks. Because they were in love. Because they couldn't wait to legitimize their relationship. And how do you think it ended? 3 days after the wedding, a strange drunk man showed up. There were still guests there, and the festivities continued. That man climbed up on the table and announced that she was his fiancée and that she was expecting his baby. Everyone rushed to the bride with questions. She lowered her eyes and cried, saying that it was true, that she made a terrible mistake. She wanted to secretly marry my great-grandfather and make him the father of her child. How did it end? The groom and the father of the baby shook hands and left to talk. An hour later, they came back and said there would be no wedding, and he would never even talk to the bride again. Anyway, she left with that man. He seemed to be an alcoholic. But, as they say, you cannot escape your destiny. Marion was not familiar with this page of family history and was very impressed. However, she decided that her situation was completely different. But she would certainly be careful. And if she noticed signs that Richard was cheating on her or anything else, she would not be forgiving and understanding wife. She would immediately make a scandal. So Marion and Richard got married. And then, instead of wasting money on a wedding trip, they decided to invest in buying an apartment with a mortgage. They managed to afford a 2-bedroom apartment in a quiet neighborhood with many playgrounds nearby. Marion was very happy and proud of herself. They didn't wait long to have a baby, and soon their daughter Anne was born. It was happiness for the whole family. "She is so beautiful," Richard's mom said when she first saw her granddaughter. "My son can only have beautiful children. I've always known that." And her mother-in-law looked at Marion in a strange way again. But Marion was completely immersed in her motherhood. She even began to read less, because now every minute of her life was filled with real life. And life went on, year after year. And then, Richard returned from a business trip, and Marion let those strangers in. Richard immediately announced who these people were. Marion felt as if the earth vanished beneath her feet and she was falling into some abyss. It turned out that he had brought his ex-wife and their son home because they had nowhere to live. "No," was the first thing Marion could say when she heard her husband. "No," and she took a step back, looking at her husband and the guests with horror. The woman desperately wanted it all to be nothing but a bad dream. "Wait, let me explain the situation," Richard said in a guilty voice. "No," she repeated and tried to stop her hysterical laugh. "Excuse me, please," the woman said. "Excuse me, please, can my son sit down somewhere? He's got a fever, he's sick, a cold." Marion opened her mouth in surprise. In fact, a moment ago she was going to kick them out of the apartment. But now, "Let's go into the living room," she said. "Here, let him lie down on the couch. Do you need antipyretics?" "Thank you, I have medicine." The woman reached into her bag. "I'll get some water," Marion said, hesitated, and added cautiously, "Or would juice be better? There's also a vitamin berry drink." "What would be better?" "Thank you very much. A vitamin drink, if possible." "Okay, wait a minute," Marion nodded. "And stop thanking me every minute," she added sharply. "I haven't done you any good yet." Richard was waiting for her in the kitchen. I should have told you everything earlier, but it's just a mistake of my youth. You know, he lowered his eyes, and Marian grimaced. Now her husband reminded her of some kind of a clown who tried to please the audience with his awkward behavior. Yes, you know, that would be nice to know that my husband, the father of my child, already has another family. We're not a family. We tried. It didn't work. It actually worked. You even succeeded in having a baby together. A byproduct of cohabitation. Marian said the last words and immediately gave herself a mental slap for being rude to the innocent child. So why didn't you tell me before? I thought if you found out, you'd leave me. But I didn't leave them to their fate. I helped financially. Not official child support, huh? Yay, not official. I persuaded Helen not to file for child support, and I transferred them some money from time to time. How much? How much what? How much did you pay her? Monthly. As much as I could. Richard was obviously confused, but then he said the amount. It didn't send the money every month. Moreover, we had a wedding, and then Anne was born. Yes, I transferred money to my ex-wife sometimes, but only when I could. But I always spent most of the money on the needs of our family and our daughter. Marian silently poured the drink, took it to the child, and returned. She had been cooking dinner before her husband returned, and now she suddenly realized that she had to turn off the oven. Marian replayed Richard's answer once again in her head, and she remembered how many beautiful gestures he had made. Gifts, flowers. You say you helped them, but that money isn't even enough to feed a dog. What? Richard looked completely confused and offended, but Marian didn't feel sorry for him. Why do you even care how much money I gave my son? He frowned. I thought you'd be glad I didn't waste our money on strangers. Strangers? How can I be glad? Marian grumbled. Do you think it's all about money? No, my dear, it's about trust. You've been lying to me all these years. Wait. She stopped, raised a finger, and closed her eyes. What about your mother? She knows, Richard sighed. She and I have talked it over and decided not to tell the truth. But she loves you. And she loves her granddaughter. And her grandson. Grandson what? Does she love him? Of course, but less. Than who? Than her granddaughter. What makes you think that? Marian literally bit her tongue, because her thoughts were confused and she wanted to accuse her husband of all sins. But she stopped herself, because right now she really needed answers to all her questions. Okay, can I ask you a favor? Yes, anything. Please keep quiet during this evening. Okay, she said with a sweet smile, patted him on the shoulder, and walked into the living room. Helen put the boy on the couch after taking off her son's outer clothing and quietly read him a book. When Marian entered, she closed the book and stood up. Marian looked at the unexpected guest one more time. But she wasn't actually a guest. It's unclear who she was. Helen looked about 6 or 8 years older than Marian. She was pretty, but clearly not the type of woman who followed fashion and visited beauty salons. Her clothes were neat but very poor. However, her son's clothes were quite different. It seemed to Marian that this woman's child was clearly her priority. Helen, you must be tired after the long trip. Marian smiled nervously. Dinner is almost ready. Why don't we have a meal? No conversations. I mean, during dinner. But then, we'll talk, and you'll tell me everything, okay, without Richard. He can go outside, or go to his mother's, or go to the balcony. But I want to hear all the details from you, not from him. Helen looked frightened, but then she seemed to realize that the owner of the apartment didn't bite, and she nodded shyly and agreed. There was some fuss. Helen needed to feed her son. His name was Vincent, and he, like all sick children, was very moody. But then they finally sat down at the table and had dinner. Marian had to secretly step on Richard's foot under the table twice because he tried to talk about something. But then his wife asked him to leave the kitchen, and he left without arguing with Marian. Don't hurt them, please, he asked his wife before he left. Can you please go away already, or I'll hurt you? Marian said indignantly. Helen was sitting in the kitchen. The medicine worked, and Vincent was finally getting better. It was time to talk and find out the truth. Marian made some more tea, put a box of cookies on the table, and put 5 teaspoons of sugar in her tea. It seems that scientists have proven that sugar can improve your mood. That would be very helpful right now. What did you want to know? Asked Helen offered timidly. How long have you known Richard? Helen began to tell her story. No, she had known him only a little before they moved in together. They had met when Richard had come to her village to help sell his grandmother's house. They decided it would be better for Grandma to move to the city and live together with him and his mother. Helen was also from that village. She grew up and lived there. She often helped Richard's grandmother because they were neighbors. That's how they met. You know how persistent he can be, Helen said, immersed in her memories. Kind of funny, but sometimes too pushy. Oh, sorry, she immediately felt embarrassed. No, that's okay, Marion nodded. You're right about that. What happened next? Richard, who had already quit one job and had not yet taken another, decided to stay in the village. He didn't want to sell the house for almost nothing, so he started to renovate it. He moved into Helen's house. Her parents died a few years ago from cancer, and she felt so painfully lonely. Richard could be charming. He knew how to distract her from sad thoughts. He said they would go to the city and start a new life together. And then, Helen told him she was pregnant. I was a fool, she confessed and wiped away her tears. I thought that if we had a baby, he would. Well, he'd realized that everything between us was serious, that we were a family. Helen was already 7 months pregnant when Richard finally sold his grandmother's house and moved back to the city. He simply packed up one day, left the village, and called her only when he was already in the city, explaining that everything was complicated, that he wasn't ready for fatherhood. But he wouldn't give up the baby. He just needed time to think about everything, and he did. When Vincent was born, he announced that Helen was not the girl of his dreams. And then, moving away from the sentimental part, he added that if Helen would file for official child support, it would offend him as a man, but if she wouldn't, then he would help them as much as he could and visit his son from time to time. And Helen agreed. He didn't tell me anything about you, Helen said. He said he had a personal life, but it was none of my business. And then, there was a fire in our house. Of course, it can be rebuilt, but it takes time and a lot of money. But now we have nowhere to live. What about the neighbors? Marion squinted. Couldn't they shelter you? It's not that simple with neighbors. Helen averted her eyes. I had a romance with a man, but anyway, he said he was divorcing his wife because she couldn't have children. He said Vincent was like his own son to him. He made promises, and then his wife got pregnant, and he came back to her. Then he told everyone in the village that I had bewitched him. Bewitched him? Seriously? Marion laughed. Who even believes in such nonsense? Some people do, Helen shrugged. It's a small, distant village. People in the villages have a different vision of life. Besides, I am a single mother. In the villagers' opinion, it's a disgrace. I know you may not believe me, but Richard told me that he was married, that he had a daughter. But he told me about it when we were already on the train. I assume this is your own apartment. Yes, Marion nodded. Yes, my husband and I pay the mortgage jointly, or rather usually I pay out of my paycheck. I am very embarrassed that we came to you. I'll try to find some other place to live. You know, I'll call my colleagues right now. Helen's eyes sparkled with a new idea. Since it so happens that Richard let us down, I'm not blaming him, but anyway, I need to make some calls. Maybe some of my coworkers can shelter us for a while. Marion felt terrible. She had a headache. However, if she could replace all those problems with a severe headache for the next couple of years, she would have said yes without hesitation. Marion also thought that she was lucky because her mom had picked up her daughter from daycare today, and Anne will stay at her grandparents' until tomorrow. She didn't want to involve her daughter in any of this, at least not today. When they finished their conversation, Richard knocked on the door. He'd been walking around the neighborhood the whole time. So, what's decided? He asked cheerfully. What did I tell you? Marion looked at him angrily. When you were leaving. I don't. I told you to shut up. Anyway, I have to go to work tomorrow. So, I'm going to prepare a room for Helen and Vincent, and then go to bed. And don't even try to talk to me today. If you expect me to forgive you, if you think that you can fix anything with your words. She poked him in the chest with her finger. Don't even dream about it. Got it? Richard sighed heavily. Have you told your parents already? No, and it's none of your business when and how I am going to tell them about it. Marion replied. In the morning, While making breakfast for 4, Marion fought a lot. Technically, Richard had not cheated on her, it had happened before they met, but he had done a terrible thing. And most importantly, he pretended to be a victim of circumstances. Marion could only imagine what would happen when her parents found out. Actually, maybe they wouldn't insist on divorce, because it was her choice. But she had already made her choice. She left work early and stopped by the bank on the way home, dialing Helen's number at the same time. "Hi." Marion smiled at her husband when he got home. "You're just in time, dinner's almost ready." "Hi." He smiled back cautiously. "Daddy." "Hi," and looked out of the room. "How are you doing?" he said, taking off his jacket. "Wonderful. What do you mean?" "Well, I guess you're asking about your ex-wife and your unwanted son, aren't you?" "They've already moved into their new apartment," Marion said, smiling. "I see." Richard nodded, sitting down at the table. Helen really liked the view from the window. "There's a big park and a pond with ducks in it." "What do you mean?" "What view? What pond?" Richard's eyes rounded. His confusion was reasonable. From the window of their small mortgage apartment, there was a view of the courtyard and a small section of the road. There wasn't any pond or park nearby. "Oh, I forgot to clarify." Marion started to serve dinner. "They've rented an apartment for 6 months so far. A new residential complex. Everything is clean and neat, and there's a medical center and a kindergarten nearby. Helen's a smart woman, and she's already found a job." "Wait, what are you talking about?" "Oh, you want details?" Marion's eyes sparkled. "Okay, listen to the details." It turned out that she had withdrawn all the money that they had been saving to buy a car. This car was supposed to be a gift for Richard. Marion deposited almost all of her money in that account. She made the decision to withdraw the money and give it to Helen. "I think she deserves some compensation after all. You haven't paid child support for all those years. And anyway, women should support and help each other. Besides, she's the mother of your son, so don't be greedy. Honey, eat your dinner before it gets cold." Marion sat down at the table and began to eat her dinner as well. She had no doubt that she had done the right thing. Even her parents, especially her father, supported her in her decision. And as for her husband, Marion knew that Richard had no choice. He would have to accept the situation.
"All right, everyone's presentations are done," Nick, the manager, said as he tried to move the discussion forward. "Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something." Nick interrupted me and began to speak. "There's apparently someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. Meetings should be for employees only." "Absolutely right." His lackey, Mike, of course, agreed with Nick. "I'm leaving." After leaving the meeting room, I started to shut down my computer. I noticed that an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking, there's no point in speaking up, no one will listen, I went home quietly. The next day, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. He was staring at his computer screen, his face pale. "Nick, is something wrong?" Mike looked at the screen with him. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Knowing the reason for Mike's distress, I thought to myself, serves them right. My name is Adam. My mother passed away when I was in the 9th grade, and I was raised by my father. Well, you could hardly call it being raised. After my mother passed, my father changed. He drowned his sorrows in alcohol, and though he still went to work, he squandered our living expenses on horse racing. Because of that, I had to start working part-time as soon as I entered high school. Every month, I went to the convenience store with bills in hand that couldn't be auto-deducted from my father's account. Even though I endured it because I didn't want to be alone, I reached my limit in my second year of high school and dropped out. I found a live-in job at a distant inn. Thank you for everything. The day I left home, my father, still staring at the TV, spoke. Take care. That was our last conversation. Back then, 18 wasn't the age of majority, so I needed my father's permission to work, and I couldn't hide my place of employment. Yet, my father never visited me even once. I kept working just to survive, and before I knew it, I was 42. Years of hard work paid off, and I was transferred to the headquarters. I was thrilled to be recognized by the company, as I thought I'd be working in the field until retirement due to my lack of formal education. Listen up. Our work can change the future of our employees. Don't drag us down. On my first day after the transfer, Nick, dressed in an expensive suit, spoke sternly. There was a reason for this. Our inn was located in a prominent tourist destination, known so well that everyone in the state could sing its commercial jingle. At its peak, we had 5 locations within the state. But that was long ago. Due to financial difficulties and aging facilities, only the place where I had worked for many years and the original establishment remained. I was prepared to lose my job anytime, but now there was a glimmer of hope. With the rise of social media, the tourist area where the inn was located started gaining attention again. Depending on how hard the sales department, where I was transferred, worked, we could either thrive or be forced to give up this prime location to the new hotel chains continuously popping up. For Nick, who had switched careers from another industry to strengthen our sales, this was a battle he couldn't afford to lose. I understood why he had to be strict. I will do my best. Nick sneered at my enthusiastic declaration. Did you not hear what I said? I'm sorry. I thought I was listening carefully. Out of habit from years of customer service, I apologized reflexively, though I had no idea what had offended him. Someone was watching me with a smirk. In this department, there are those who are expected to excel and those who have been shoved here because they have nowhere else to go. You are the latter. It was Mike, the section chief. He's 7 years younger, at 35. But he was called to headquarters much earlier than I was and had been moving around within the headquarters ever since. I'm not jealous, but I can't accept that he's my boss. Graduating from a prestigious university, he has an unusually high pride and caused many problems as a newbie, making things very difficult for me when I was the front desk leader. When I found out Mike was transferred to the sales department a month before me, I was disheartened. Mike is right. With just a middle school diploma, there's not much you can do. Don't even think about achieving results. As if I didn't exist, Nick remarked, I'm thirsty. Mike eagerly ran to the coffee maker. It seems Mike is Nick's lackey. I regretted being happy about my transfer to headquarters, wishing I had stayed on site forever. Send a direct mail to every company on this list by the end of the day. Nick only assigned me tasks that even a new graduate could handle. What? There are over 1,000 companies. You want me to send to all of them by today? Yes, if you and your fellow misfits split the work, even those with nowhere else to go should finish by today. I glanced at the employees typing away expressionlessly. They were worn out from customer service, only thinking about leaving on time, or were women reassigned after having children, with zero motivation for work. Even Sam, a new graduate from the same university as Mike, who was supposed to be among the expected achievers, had no enthusiasm for the job, having joined the company wanting to do customer service. I don't care what they say, I plan to quit anytime, he said. Only Nick and Mike were highly motivated, making all the decisions between the two of them. I originally only wanted to work at the inn to survive and had no particular attachment to this job. I swallowed my words, thinking I had no right to reprimand them. About a month after the transfer, Nick told us with a frustrated look. To commemorate the 50th anniversary, we've decided to create a plan exclusive for one group per day. Originally, Mike and I were supposed to come up with it, but our president, Mr. Thompson, insists on hearing everyone's opinions. So, you all get a chance. As Nick explained, Mike began handing out prints. Make sure not to embarrass Nick. If your ideas are half-baked, you'll have to redo them. It seemed that they had printed his handwritten notes by Mr. Thompson, which included several questions and a section for free responses. It made sense why Nick had to seek our input, given that all responses had to be submitted to Mr. Thompson. We were given a week to think about it, and a meeting was scheduled to compile our ideas. My plan is to let guests enjoy both the old and modern America. Nick began the presentations. Guests would watch a master confectioner at a nearby traditional sweet shop make sweets in front of them. The welcome drink would be premium tea in a bottle. Nick's plan was certainly attractive. After his presentation, Nick called on us to present in the order we were seated. Just as I stood up for my turn. All right, everyone's presentations are done. Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something. Nick interrupted me. There's someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. He was likely talking about me. I joined the company as a part-timer and was made a full-time employee when I turned 20. That was 20 years ago, so Nick and Mike probably had no chance to know until recently. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. After that, Nick kept creating opportunities to solicit everyone's opinions, purposefully excluding me from speaking. The meeting unexpectedly heated up and went past the scheduled end time. A few people asked to leave, and the discussion continued with the remaining few. Still here? Normally, you'd leave in that situation. Though I had no attachment to the job initially, hearing kind words from customers made me want to make them happier. For someone like me, with nowhere to go, the inn was my home and customer service was my life. I felt pathetic about my current self. I'm leaving. I left the conference room and started shutting down my computer. I noticed an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking no one would listen to what I had to say anyway, I quietly went home. The next day, while preparing the DM as instructed, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. In his haste to stand up, he hit his knee on the desk. He stared at his computer screen, his face pale. Nick! What's wrong? Mike, thinking he should be the first to rush over, approached Nick while still wearing his coat. He peered at the screen with Nick. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Who is responsible for this company? Nick, more irritated than ever, asked, and Mike answered without checking. Probably Sam. Sam wasn't there because he was attending a morning training session for new hires. Nick gave up on getting angry and returned his gaze to the screen. They were looking at an email that arrived right after the end of the working day yesterday. Apparently, no one, including me, had checked it before leaving. The email was from a large company that used us for their annual employee trips. The president and executives of that company also frequently used our services personally. President of the company, Mr. Mason himself, had declared that neither he nor his company would ever use our services again. Well, some companies cancel their employee trips or stop using our services due to financial struggles. Let's just move on. Mike kept wiping the sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. Knowing why Mike was so agitated, I quietly watched their interaction. Do you know how much revenue we get from that company? We can find other guests to fill the rooms, but we'll lose the banquet costs, gift shop revenue, rental car fees, and more. Moreover, the gifts were supposed to be prepared by the traditional confectionery shop involved in Nick's proposed plan. If it's known that we incurred such a huge loss at this critical time, Nick's position in the company would be jeopardized. Nick took a deep breath, seemingly trying to calm himself. All right, Mike. Go to New York right now and apologize to Mr. Mason. What? You're coming with me, right? I have urgent work to do. I trust you, which is why I'm entrusting this to you. Please. Mike, believing Nick's sincerity, agreed with a determined look on his face, saying, yes. That's Nick for you. Even if Mike went to apologize, Nick would shift all the blame onto him if the client didn't change their mind. Well, it was Mike's fault to begin with, so it served him right. About 3 hours later, Sam answered a call from somewhere and repeatedly apologized, saying, I'm very sorry. Everyone watched to see what was happening. After ending the call, he informed Nick with a weary tone. When Mike arrived at the client's company, he only made things worse, further infuriating Mr. Mason. He was demanding, get his boss here immediately. It was no wonder Sam was exhausted, dealing with such a call right after returning from training. What is that idiot doing? All right, Adam, you're coming with me. If sacrificing Mike didn't work, then I must be next. Normally, I'd want to refuse at all costs, but I saw an opportunity in this situation. If I can be of assistance, I'd be happy to join you. I obediently followed Nick, and we flew to New York. When we introduced ourselves at the reception, it became clear how serious the situation was, as the receptionist personally escorted us to the president's office. Angry voices leaked through the door, making both Nick and me uneasy. Excuse me. I'm Nick, the supervisor. I understand my subordinate has caused you trouble, and I deeply apologize. Nick, with his experience in the corporate world, knew enough to offer an apology before excuses. However, his customer service skills left much to be desired. I sighed as I saw Mike trembling like a small dog in the corner of the room. "What kind of training are you giving your subordinates?" Mr. Mason glared at Nick with a red face. The intensity of his gaze made even Nick take a step back. Regrettably, I joined this company only 2 years ago and was unaware of Mike's issues. I should have identified his shortcomings sooner. Indeed, I should have realized sooner. No sensible person would come to apologize and then give a lengthy presentation on the drawbacks of not using their in. Nick froze, his mouth slightly open. Suspecting the worst, I picked up the documents that had fallen to the floor. It seemed Mike hastily prepared these documents on the plane, listing the disadvantages. Disadvantage 1: if you change the venue for the company trip, employees might suspect it's for cost-cutting reasons, leading to a negative impression. Reading it aloud half-jokingly, Nick snatched the papers from my hand and checked the contents with a furious expression. Among the stack of documents was a receipt from a nearby convenience store's copy machine. I felt a pang of dread, hoping he hadn't shown the receipt as well. What do you think he said when I asked what kind of nerve he had to do this? I'm very sorry. Faced with the dire situation, Nick must have thought there was nothing left to do but apologize. In a voice smaller than I'd ever heard from him, he uttered words of apology. He said, "I'm a Harvard graduate. I don't believe I said anything wrong." "Mike, what have you done?" Forgetting his plan to pin the blame on Mike, Nick yelled loudly, even in front of Mr. Mason. "I didn't do anything wrong." "You're still saying that? Look at him." Mike pointed at me with a shaking hand. "I was assigned to headquarters in my 20s and now I'm a section chief. This guy only made it to headquarters at 42. Everything I've done proves I was right. So why are we losing the contract?" Having said his piece, Mike collapsed to the floor. "Of course. You were sent there because you had nowhere else to go." Mike never expected to hear such words from someone he looked down upon. He lunged at me, and Nick hurriedly stepped in to stop him. "Mr. Thompson told me Mike is a quick thinker, and to take good care of him." There's no way he was pushed aside. "Don't make things worse here. He didn't say quick thinker, he said only quick-witted, didn't he?" I don't remember that part. I recalled the many troubles Mike caused when he was a newbie. When Mike was on the front line, his pride was so high that he never apologized to customers. Customer service, especially in our job, doesn't work alone. It brings both good and bad situations. If the front staff or housekeepers made mistakes, or the cleaning company didn't properly clean a room, one had to apologize to the customers regardless of personal fault. Mike, in such situations, would never apologize, insisting he wasn't at fault. This often angered customers, and as the front desk leader, I frequently had to apologize on his behalf. He caused complaints and disrupted operations, which is why he was quickly moved to headquarters. In departments where he didn't interact directly with customers, his quick thinking was beneficial and things went well. But it seemed his flaws were starting to show. Corporate reservations are supposed to be entered into the system by the sales representative. But a quick check yesterday revealed that more than 10 items were missing from the client's reservation. The handover document clearly stated what needed to be prepared. Why didn't you enter it into the system? Why do we have to give them special treatment? Filling rooms near the banquet hall, setting up all the food in advance. Specifying the brand of wine, they're too demanding. No wonder he always angered customers, I thought, feeling a headache coming on. Grouping them in rooms near the banquet hall is for our benefit too. It makes it easier for the staff to set up beds and serve breakfast since everyone's schedule is synchronized. As for the other requests, Mr. Mason suggested them to lighten our load. I didn't know that. Nick finally seemed to realize that Mike was the one who had angered the client. What did you say to them? I just told them we wouldn't give them special treatment anymore. We shouldn't waste effort on things that don't bring in money. I was utterly exasperated at his lack of understanding of customer service. Of course, we shouldn't comply with unreasonable demands. But carrying over successful practices from past stays makes customers feel remembered and enhances their experience. Good memories encourage repeat visits. That's part of our job. I looked down at Mike, who was sitting on the floor. In our job, nothing is a waste. Mr. Thompson likely moved you to the sales department, hoping you'd finally understand this. How do you think he feels now that you failed to meet his expectations? Mike, tears in his eyes, fled the president's office. I was amazed he still hadn't apologized. You have it tough, Adam. It's okay, we're all employees of the same company. I deeply apologize for this disrespectful incident. Especially after all the care you've shown us. If it weren't for you, Adam, I really would have stopped staying here. When I heard you were moving to the sales department, I was willing to reconsider if you handled it. Seeing us talk so amicably, Nick's face contorted. Do you two know each other? Adam's service is excellent. I always requested him specifically. Normally, we don't accept specific staff requests, but we made an exception for Mr. Mason, adjusting my shifts accordingly. He had personally stayed at our hotel just before my transfer, and during casual conversation, I mentioned, I'm moving to the sales department soon. If I hadn't told him then, things could have been much worse. Please continue to take care of us. I look forward to it. On the return flight, Nick awkwardly offered me a can of beer. It's still working hours. Of course, I had no intention of forgiving him for a single beer. Nick might try to pin everything on Mike and avoid any consequences. While pondering this, a startling fact came to light. Nick, the tea bottles for the plan have arrived. I handed Nick a bottle labeled with our inn's name. They look good. What are you talking about? These are plastic bottles. I had assumed we would use the trendy, high-end bottling tea. But what arrived were ordinary plastic bottles of tea with customized labels. The only unique aspect was the label, which had the inn's name, making it look customized. Upon further investigation, I discovered that a substantial amount of money was set to be paid to the tea company. It was priced like bottling tea. Does this plastic bottle really cost $100 each? The tea inside is specially blended for us. The extra cost is for that. Wouldn't it be better to use another tea company? Or is there a specific reason we must use this one? As Nick continued to make excuses, I showed him a printed email. I informed the tea company's president, Mr. Mitchell, that we discovered irregular payments and he confessed. He said you two were high school classmates and planned to split the extra money. That idiot. Why did he confess? That's not important. You should worry about yourself, this could turn into a police matter. Opening the bottle cap, I suggested. How about calming down with this tea? It supposedly has a relaxing effect. Nick drank the tea frantically. In the following days, decisions were made about their fates. Mike was reassigned to the General Affairs Department, with no chance of transfer or promotion, as per Mr. Thompson's orders. As for Nick, since the payment to the tea company hadn't yet been made, he narrowly avoided legal trouble. Instead, he was encouraged to leave the company, and to avoid further complications, Nick submitted his resignation. Rumor has it that connections between HR departments have made it difficult for him to find new employment. Even though it was good to have those two gone, something unexpected happened in the sales department. Everyone became motivated and united in refining the 50th anniversary plan. In the end, my plan was adopted. We collaborated with the Tourist Information Center to provide personalized guides. The plan, tailored to the number of guests, was truly special for the 50th anniversary. Hey, is Adam's family coming to stay? I immediately booked that special plan for my family. Sam noticed it on the reservation list and quickly picked up on it. Yes, I'm inviting my father. That's great. I might invite my parents too. I lacked the courage to face my father just as Adam. But here, with the confidence Mr. Mason praised, I felt ready. The 50th anniversary plan was a perfect opportunity to reconnect with my father. I hoped to bring back the days when we could laugh together as we once did.